And now it's Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on Deborah Kobylt Live Special Edition. And we have joining us author, publisher, and my dear friend, Scott Ryan, who is here to talk about his latest book. What a terrific read! The Last Decade of Cinema. Takes place in the 1990s, and he goes through so many incredible films. We're going to go down memory lane a little bit, but not really memory lane, Scott, because I have to tell you, these are films now that I'm still watching, right, to this day. I'll stream them. I think I told you when we were off camera, I watch Birdcage every year on my birthday. I'm obsessed. But I first want to ask you, why did you write this book? It's very niche, but it's incredibly smart and interesting. Let's talk about it.
Well, basically, it all started in COVID, like everything. And you had to watch stuff. You were just sitting at home. And I would go through streaming things, and I couldn't find anything to watch that interested me. And every movie that I would click on and watch, I would say, when was this movie made? And it would be in the 90s.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking, like, why am I still going back to watch these movies from this decade? And so I ended up making a long list of films. And I started to think that this was really important, that as a culture, we had changed fundamentally what we wanted to get out of movies from the 90s to today.
Well, you know what I like to say? We all collectively would hop in the car, on a bicycle, walk, whatever, and go to the movies. It was something that we all had in common, right? There was a film coming out. We were all excited about it. It was really the last decade, which is in your title, when we really did that. Now everybody is streaming. I never really know what to watch because it's not really something collective that we're all doing at the same time. That's an issue for me, but I don't want to sound like I'm 100 years old saying, oh, in the olden days. But you know what I mean? It was a collective thing that we all had in common. And that's what I also got out of the book. But what do you say about that?
Well, I think it's totally true. And you have this discussion now with people where you're like, oh, have you seen? And they're like, no, 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 don't say it. I haven't seen it. Don't talk about it. And you can't have that. Where in the 90s, you kind of had to watch things as they happened. It's certainly true that it played at the theater and then it would come out as VHS and then eventually DVD. So there were two times when people would watch. But now, who knows when somebody's streaming something?
No. And you talk about in your book about going rentals, right? About renting a film. I must confess, it drove me nuts. We would drive down to our local Blockbuster. Inevitably, whatever I wanted was either not there or it was like torn in half and somebody returned it taped together. And that used to make me nuts. And then, of course, it came out on Netflix and you would get it in the mail, right? A DVD in
Right.
the mail. That I thought was a little bit easier. But I have to say, every time we went down there, especially when my kids were little and we, rent, I don't know, a Barney movie, and then we would bring it home and it wasn't working. And then, people were crying. I don't know if I love that experience, but I know you did. You really
I
said,
did.
yeah, talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I worked at a video store and I started in 1990, which is again what sort of made this all come together for me because when you work at a video store, you have this strange desire to see everything that comes out. So
Love
I
it.
probably watched every movie release from 1990 to 1993 while I was working there. But here's where I would disagree with you about
Mm.
the video store experience. You are 100% right. You get in your car, you drive down there because you want to watch Pretty Woman, and Pretty Woman is out. And that's when you could make the greatest discovery of your life because you got to get something. And so you see this birdcage, and you're like,
Oh,
the birdcage? Oh, Robin Williams. I like Robin Williams. Nathan Lane. All right, let's get it. And you discover a frickin' masterpiece. And I don't think that happens as much on streaming because one thing is you can't discover it because as soon as I hover over it, they're showing me the best parts of the movie and it's pounding me. And I'm like, I don't even want to see this yet. And I have no control over that.
that's a very good point. And thank you for bringing up Birdcage. You can bring it up throughout our entire conversation. I'm just obsessed. I'm obsessed with their performances, especially when Hank Azaria had those shoes on and he fell. Because the truth is, I don't wear shoes well. I don't. I can't wear heels very well. I'm not really so terrific with any shoes. I'm always barefoot going out to get the mail. And my husband's like, what are you doing? You're going to step on something. I'm like, even better than falling. So I see Hank Azaria and I'm like, oh my God, that's me. And then, of course, come on, Nathan Lane, Robin Williams. Oh my gosh, who played the senator? Help me out.
Gene Hackman
Gene Hackman. Do we love
is
him, especially at the
incredible.
Oh my God, Calista Flockhart. I mean, the list just goes on. And then Christine Baranski.
And it's killing me that I can't think of Gene Hackman's wife because I love her in Parenthood. And her name is not
hang on, Diane Wiest.
Diane Wiest.
Mm-hmm.
And you
I
know,
could just
because we're talking about Birdcage, I'm going to bring up the scene that I use so what I do with these movies is I try to pick a scene that sort of explains the movie or why it's lasted this long or why it couldn't be made today.
Yeah.
One of the scenes that I talk about is the scene where they all sing, I could have danced all night. I could have danced all night. And it shows how pop culture brings people together. Here you've got, a drag queen, you've got a gay man, you've got a very prim and proper senator and his wife, and you've got your beloved Agador. Every one of them knows every word to I Could Have Danced All Night because all of us went to the movies and saw My Fair Lady, whatever your age was. And that's the kind of thing that I just don't believe happens in our culture right now. And I think it really does spill over to how we treat each other.
You and I can start singing it right now, right?
Of course.
Just one of those moments where you just are all in on it together. So to your point, you're absolutely correct. Let's take another one. The Ice Storm. I remember, for those of you who may or may not have seen The Ice Storm, it terrified me a little bit. Do you want to know why? It's supposed to show how innocent I may or may not be. I couldn't believe that couples were putting their keys into a bowl, and it's not a spoiler alert. That film's been out forever. That's not a spoiler. Right. And then whoever's keys you take, you're going home and having some fun with them. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like, really? This is happening in the boring suburbs? And it was just, and then, people were ignoring what was happening to the kid and the kids. And I thought it was just so sad. I don't think I could even watch it again, but it was a classic. It was such a great film. And I know that's one of your favorites. Let's talk about that.
It really and truly is one of my all-time favorite films. And in watching it again, it's the scene you're talking about, the key scene where they're in the fishbowl, they got all the keys. And that's really not what the movie's about, but this is a major scene in the movie. Right. I was so uncomfortable watching it. Because, you can think like, oh, boy, that'd be fun. Let's go to that party. But then when you start seeing someone's going home with your wife, there's nothing fun about that. Everyone in the scene is uncomfortable and you watching it are uncomfortable. And then you start imagining that happening to you. And it made me realize this is what's missing from modern movies. They don't want to make a movie that makes you uncomfortable. They don't want to make a movie that makes you think. Come into the theater. We've got comfy chairs. We'll bring you your food. Just relax. Don't be upset about anything. But sometimes being upset makes you appreciate your partner and appreciate your life that you have. And the Ice Storm does it like nobody else.
Oh, that really invoked a lot of conversation, right? I remember leaving when did that come out? What year was that?
97.
Okay. I was married to my husband. I don't think we had any kids yet because we have 3 sons, as you know. And it made me so uncomfortable. I remember looking at him saying, and my husband, pretty well. I said, would you ever want to do that? And he's like, no, it's like this awful. And I mean, to this day, the films you selected, I started conversations with John and my other friends throughout the week because I was reading the book. And I said, do you remember this film? And we would go off for 20 minutes. But we don't do that, to your point, nowadays because we don't have that thing that's collectively in common. Maybe with some shows like The Crown. I was one of the last people on earth to watch The Crown. I mean, I think it was out for eons. And John and I are like, all right, should we try it? But it's still different. It's not a film. It's a series over a long period of time. So that's actually different altogether.
But it is the same because, because if you started to say to someone, oh, I'm watching The Crown and I can't believe this. And then they'd say, oh, I'm in season 3. And you're like, well, I'm in season 5. So that happens too. We used to do this with television as well. We all watched LA Law, or we all watched, 30 something or whatever, Seinfeld, and then you would go to work the next day and you would talk about it. And
Yeah.
that just doesn't happen because we're all consuming art at our own pace, which there's good to that. It's, I definitely say in the book, I'm not saying we should go back. It's just
Right.
looking at this moment and why it was different than that.
Right. It's a moment in time in all of our collective histories. When you talk about that moment, it's a happy moment for all of us. It's not like we're
Yeah.
saying, oh, that was awful. We're saying, oh, wow, remember that? And we would meet at the theater. We'd meet in front of the theater.
Yeah.
We'd go out afterwards and talk about the film. You're right. That doesn't really happen anymore, I will say. I'm going to pick out a couple of the other films that you talked about. 1999, Eyes Wide Shut. I didn't see it. Do you want to know why?
Well, I think because you were still upset about the ice storm.
Probably. The PR around it. Okay, I must get freaked out really easily. But all the publicity around it, that those two actors, I'll let you say who were married, just couldn't like get the scene together in terms of the love scene. And I remember thinking, how could this be? They're married. How could they it bothered me so much. It just goes to show what negative publicity could do for someone. I wouldn't see it. And I was just at the Venice Film Festival in Italy, and I was speaking about media and film, how media can actually take a movie down. And for me, the media around that, I wouldn't go see it. But you chose that film. So let's talk about why.
Well, and I will say that Eyes Wide Shut was the movie I was the most afraid to write about. I really
Oh,
kept putting it off to the end because I honestly felt that I wasn't smart enough to write
okay.
about it. It is
Hmm.
so complex,
It is.
and there are a ton of books about Stanley Kubrick and that film. But what I decided to focus on was just the smallest thing that it could be about. I really pulled it down and I was like, you know what this movie's about? Boredom.
Yeah.
And when I came across that idea, it's really what it's about. The Tom Cruise character is just bored in life,
Yeah.
and he is trying to find something to knock him out of this. Nicole Kidman was his wife then and plays his wife in the movie, and their parents, and they're just bored. And
Yeah.
so once I came across that, then I knew what I could write about. But it is a complex film. I think you should maybe give it a shot. It is a
Really?
little risque and it definitely messes with your mind. But there's no way you can watch it and not have a discussion with someone after. Because again, I'm not saying I could tell you what the movie's about because I
Mm.
don't think I could.
Okay. I mean, I know what it's about, and I've read quite a bit about it, but that publicity kind of turned me off from it. But now
No, and
you're
I
going to
do
meet,
talk about that as well. That this,
yes,
for a couple of these movies, I talk about how the publicity is something that someone watching it today wouldn't know about. Which it's
no,
interesting that you gave a speech about how media can take down a movie. Media can take down a movie right now, but not in the future. What do you think about that?
what do you mean, not in the future?
Well, future generations doesn't care what the Entertainment Weekly said or the New York Times because they just stumble upon the movie and watch it.
Well, what I was talking about was I only referred to back in the day. What I was saying was the modern media now is social media. It's influencers. It's maybe your
Right,
favorite influencer who saw film A, B, or C or streamed a show. And if they didn't like it, you're probably not, it no longer
right.
Siskel and Ebert, right? Or you're right, Entertainment Weekly or even ET. Um, Now it's an influencer, whatever's online, whatever you're scrolling and looking at. I think that's what could make or break a film. Although I did notice when I was at the Venice Film Festival, a star can really still sell his or her film. It was a very elegant film festival this year, I have to say, beautifully done. And when George and Brad sort of coming off the boat, you're saying, I don't know what the film is, but I'm going to go see it anyway. By the way, it's Wolves. And you know what I mean? So they really sold it. And because they sold it so well, the media behind it, I know this isn't about your book, but the media took notice and they wrote accordingly, I have to say, which was very interesting.
But
Um,
I'm going to point out that you're
yeah,
talking about George and Brad, who
yeah,
are from the 90s. So you're
Yep.
saying stars exist, but they're older, they're the stars from the star-making time. If Julia Roberts made a
Yeah.
movie, I don't know if Nathan Lane could still open a movie, but I sure wish he could because I
Oh,
love him.
oh,
But I mean,
yes, he
people
could.
from the 90s are still around. Patricia Arquette, who I interviewed for this book.
Yes.
Patricia Arquette is still a superstar, but are people today, are there really stars like George Clooney and Brad Pitt that have just been discovered in the last 4 or 5 years? I
I'm going to
don't know.
say I'm okay. I'm going to go a step further. I was going to say, I don't know. I don't think so, but maybe it's because that's not where I'm looking, right? Maybe if I'm 22 and I'm looking for the latest person on, being streamed or at the movies, it might not be Clooney and Pitt because I didn't grow up with Clooney and Pitt, right? So it's very interesting. It can very much be generational. Let's face it,
Right.
right? Talk about some of the other films that you wrote because you wrote about you selected 25. I believe that there were 36,000 films that were
Yeah.
made in the 1990s. You looked at 160 and you chose 25 for this book. How did you go about doing that? Because I believe you didn't just pick something that you liked. You picked a film that you believed was relevant to the time, correct?
Right. There were two things that I wanted from the film.
Yeah.
One, I wanted it to say something that I could talk about. So you could watch a movie and like it and think it was good, but I was like, what would I say about that?
Yeah.
If it didn't say something, then I didn't really want to cover it. The other thing is I wanted to show how there was a variety of films. Part of the problem with today is they're all Marvel and superhero movies. And even if they're not directly superhero movies, they still have the feeling of a superhero movie, which is I'm going to be this regular person that's going to do something amazing without doing any work to be able to do it. And that's pretty much the plot of every movie made. I wanted to pick 25 films that are nothing like the other picture. We've already talked about Eyes Wide Shut, Birdcage, there's nothing, Ice Storm, there's nothing similar in those. There's
No, it's
Unforgiven
true.
in the book, The Prince of Tides, which I absolutely love, The Prince of Tides, Shawshank Redemption, Pulp Fiction. Nothing connects these movies. And they all were blockbusters, which I don't talk about in the book. I don't mention money and I don't mention awards ever in the whole book.
No.
I just am talking about legacy.
What do you think drove people to see Pulp Fiction? Also, Malcolm X is something else that you talk about. But what do you think drove them to Pulp Fiction? Because I know what drove me were the actors. That dance that they did was so. I often look at that, and I'm sure it's written somewhere. And I'm like, was that choreographed? It must have been choreographed. I mean, everything's choreographed, right? But it was so. It so didn't look choreographed. It looked so natural. They were just so on, right, in that film.
Well, and the idea behind that dance is they are all pop culture based dances or gimmick dances.
Right.
Those are every dance they did. And Uma wanted to add the bat dance
Oh,
from Batman, and Quentin said, okay, because that also was a pop culture type reference. But for me, it was Quentin Tarantino. I knew, I'd heard, I'd read this was the movie of the year. I was 24 years old. I went to it in the daytime. It was me and my video time manager. And the theater had three other people, all elderly, and they did not like Pulp Fiction.
I'm
And
sure they
I
didn't.
loved it. And it was such a cultural divide between, the old cinema and new cinema. So I really think Pulp Fiction is the film of the 90s.
You brought up Quentin Tarantino, and we know that he has a theater here in Los Angeles and he shows films here. I know that he really respects and appreciates the way to watch a film, going to the theater. And there's other ways too, but he clearly still has that appreciation for film. Do you think it might come back in a big way again? Where we go to the theater. I mean, you look at Gen Z, I believe. They're sick of social media. A lot of them are. They're like, oh my gosh, really? Like, I know my kids, they're really not big social media people. I don't even know how I did that. They're just not. They just think it's dumb. You know what they say to me? Oh, mom, it's for old people like you. I'm like, thanks. But and so I wonder, is it possible that they will embrace going to the theater again and making it special the way it was in the 90s? What do you think?
I do. And I went to Quentin's theater. It's called the New Beverly.
Yeah.
I went to see The Thin Red Line because, I do write 25 main essays, but in the back of the book, I write 30 short paragraphs because there were just too many films I wanted to cover. And in that one, I cover The Thin Red Line, which is a Nick Nolte film. And it was playing at Quentin's Theater on 35 millimeter. It was totally sold out. They give a speech and they say, if you look at your phone during the previews, you are banned for life from the theater. If you look
Oh,
at your phone during the end credits, you are banned for life from the theater. If you talk,
wow.
you are banned from life at the theater. And
Okay.
everyone was respectful. Everyone watched the film. Every seat was taken. It was an amazing experience. If I lived in LA, I would go to the New Bev once a month at a minimum. It's
Well,
great.
next time you come visit, that's what you're going to do. And I will tell you though, I will be thrown out because I'm someone who will look at John and say, "Can you believe that just happened?" He's like, "Deborah, please, I'm trying to watch the film." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean you're trying to watch it? Look what just happened." And he's like, "Deborah, I can't hear what's going on." And this is how I watch a movie. Even when we're watching something at home, he's like, "I have to rewind it because I can't hear anything." So yeah, Quentin would just sort of come and tap me on the shoulder and say, "Deborah, out." You know what I mean? You're banned forever. In which case, I would come back with glasses and a wig or a sweatshirt
Right.
over my head.
But you're too
Yeah.
famous in LA. Everybody would know you. It couldn't happen.
Oh,
Maybe
darling.
for me.
No, darling. Of course, we know that. But that's a whole different story another time. But I respect Quentin for that. I really, really do. And a note out of that page. I just have to make sure that when I go, I keep my mouth shut. You
And it's
know.
really cool. They match the film with a cartoon. So for
Mm.
The Thin Red Line is a war movie. So they played a Bugs Bunny war cartoon in front of it. And it's just like those little fun things that make it worth going. I think if every major city had a theater like that that played on 35 millimeter, played
Right.
old movies, and old being, I think he plays like 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s,
Right.
in that time frame. I mean, I would do it if I had the money. I'd open one here in Sarasota.
Yeah, Sarasota. You're calling in from my hometown, Sarasota, and I'll be seeing you soon. Actually, we're going to be going to dinner there, and well, we've got Burns Court, right? Let's talk about Sarasota for a moment, right? Burns Court plays some fabulous films there. Where else do you go to frequent films in Sarasota? I know there's that big theater over on Main Street, right? Um,
Yeah, I can't think of what it is. It's right on Siesta and Tamiami. There's
yeah,
a mall right there, and they actually have a pretty cool film fest. That's where the Sarasota Film Fest is, where
yeah.
I went to see a documentary about the Indigo Girls not too long ago, and it was really good. And I kind of would like to do a David Lynch film fest there. So I'm kind of thinking about trying to pull that off since I've covered a lot of David Lynch movies.
You
So
have
that's a great place too.
to go see film.
Yeah, I forget what it's called though.
That's
Sad.
okay. But I grew up going to Burns Court, and they still have all kinds of interesting films that they show there, right? Do you go there at all for the for
I have
films?
not been there. No, I haven't been there. I'll have to
Oh,
look it
come
up.
on. Okay, you've got to. They have some incredible art films there, some mainstream films, various genres. It's really terrific. It's right there on Pineapple. I mean, I'm going real small here, right? This is very, most of the people in my audience are going to say, what is she talking about? But it's a terrific theater on Burns Court, right off of Pineapple. Go see it, and then you'll report back to me. Maybe we'll go when I'm
Yes.
down there.
Okay.
But let's get back to your book for a moment. How did you decide who even to interview for this book? How did you get in touch with them? You do so much research. You're a very researched and detailed author. You really are, which is why I love
Thank
your
you.
books.
And we should say that they're also funny. Like I'm not academic in any way.
No,
It's a light read and it's very humor based.
very.
So I really wanted to get a writer, a director, an actor, and I wanted to try to get, females, males, all around. So I kept reaching out to people all the time and I got some amazing interviews. I talked to the guy who wrote Menace to Society. I talked to Alexander Payne, who of course just recently did The Offboarders or something like that with
Hmm.
Paul Giamatti last year.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
he's most famous for Sideways, but he did Citizen Ruth, Patricia Arquette, I already mentioned. And for me,
yeah.
the big one was Helen Childress, who wrote Reality Bites, which I think is the most quintessential 90s movie about living in the 90s. And so I
Hmm.
got to interview Helen and also Natasha Gregson Wagner, who is Natalie Wood's daughter, who was
Yeah.
in Two Girls and a Guy, and she was adorable.
Yeah. Um, you've written many books, I believe 10. And I've interviewed you
I
for
know.
quite
Am
a
I the
few of them.
top guest?
You might be, honestly, you might be. But I like your stuff. You're a fun guest. I really think your books are terrific, and I do read them cover to cover. They're great. But you've written Twin Peaks. You wrote about Moonlighting. What a terrific book that was. Barbra Streisand. You wrote a book. It's like an encyclopedia about her. Oh my gosh, I've got that on my coffee table in the living room. That's heavy. It's a beautifully done book, illustrated. It's just fantastic. It's beautiful. David Letterman, 30 something. How do you pick what you do? Is it just something that, and what would you like to do? You mentioned David Lynch, you'd like to do a film festival, but what else would you like to do?
Well, first of all, how I pick is honestly by the interviews I get. I mean, the last decade of cinema, and I think this is the truth, is the first book I've ever done that was my idea from just my idea. Like where I
Yeah,
was like, I want to write about 90s film. Now, how do I write about that?
yeah,
Normally, I get the interview. Like with Moonlighting, I had a relationship with Glenn Gordon Caron, who created it. We interviewed. He gave me the go ahead. Once I got Sybil Shepherd, I had a book. Same with like Dave and 30 something. And in the Twin Peaks world, I know a lot of those people, so it's very easy for me to do that.
right.
And in fact, the book I'm working on now is about the music of Twin Peaks, so I'm back to,
You're
writing
back
about
to it.
Lynch. But my
Yeah.
dream book is Ally McBeal. I think that show is incredible. I would love to interview David E. Kelley and the entire cast. And again, it's from the 90s. I don't know why I always go back there, but I think it was just a time when art was really flourishing. But I think Ally really captured the 90s as well. And I would love to do a book about that.
That dance, right? That
Yeah, in the
dance.
bathroom that they
And
did, it's great.
the bathroom, that's right. That was so smart, and so well played, I have to say, and so unique. Never been anything like it before, never been anything like it since. Gosh, well, I'm hopeful because I know when you set your mind to something, it happens. It
Well, I
really
never
does.
give up. Like I'll be persistent and I'll work on this and then I'll try. And as you mentioned, I run a publishing company and I'm doing one of my authors is a director who actually directed the pilot of Picket Fences, which was created by David E. Kelley. And so I'm
Yeah,
like, do you have David E. Kelley's email? And he had one. He didn't know if it was current. I emailed, didn't hear back. And then I interviewed Alicia Witt for this book, and she's good friends with Michelle Pfeiffer, who's married to David E. Kelley. So I'm always trying to get there. But you need the creator of the show if you want to
yeah,
do a book, because
yeah.
that otherwise the actors don't want to talk to you. They want to know it's approved and that you're not going to do a hit job or anything, which I mean, my books are not that way at all. Like I'm here to lift up art.
No, and as you said to yourself, they're fun. Your books are a lot of fun. I mean, they may have great info in there, but they're fun and you want to just keep reading about it. You bring back a lot of memories for people, right? I really
Right.
appreciate that. What else would you like to say about the book that I didn't even think to ask you? It's comprehensive, it's well done. Um,
Well, I will
go
say
ahead.
that I did the audio book
Ah,
and I think it's really good. Like, because I do have a lot of sarcasm in the book and I
right.
do like to drop jokes out of nowhere. And I read the book myself. And so I'm really proud of the audiobook. I mean, I kind of almost think it's better than the actual book. The other thing that's kind of exciting is that my company was just acquired by Simon and Schuster. So
Oh,
all of our books are going to be going out through Simon and Schuster, the back ones, and then the forward, the books we're doing ahead. So we've only been doing this company for 5 years, and to be with Simon and Schuster now is incredible. So I'm very, very excited about that.
wow. Congratulations. That
Thank
is
you.
great. I love that you're living your dream because I know you are. I know this gives you joy and now you're making money doing it. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it is so much work to be a small business. Like it's hard to explain to people like the things you got to jump through and just like knowing that we're going to have a wider berth for our books really feels good for my authors as well, not just for me, because we have a lot
Yeah.
of authors.
Yeah. Well, it's been great talking to you, Scott. I really, really enjoyed it. Please, people, pick up the book, The Last Decade of Cinema. And I mean, we didn't, mention all the films, right? You've got Goodfellas, Terminator 2, Prince of Tides. There's so much in here. Shawshank Redemption. Pick it up. It's great. It's a great read, fun read. And there's a lot of memories there. And it really gets you thinking, like, gosh, can we go back to this time? I'm going to say yes. Again, you said it's not really about going back, but in a way, we need to go back a little bit so that we have
Right.
something in common in life. You know what I mean? A commonality.
I do, and I really think it matters. And I think that it's how we learn empathy. And one of the things, I know we're wrapping up, but one of the things I talk about is there's something about sitting in a dark room and hearing a stranger laugh when you laugh. That makes a
Yes.
bond between a stranger. And I think it is so important.
Yeah, and also buying popcorn and having it like happen to spill on the ground, or your Coke, you kick it by accident. It's an experience going to the
Yes.
movies, right? I mean, I'm actually being serious about that. It's this whole experience, getting your candy or whatever it is you get, sitting down, to your point, hearing somebody across the theater laughing, or in my case, talking to whoever's with me to the point where they want to throw me out of the theater. It's an experience, right? It
Right.
really, really is. Gosh, I'm so glad I got to speak to you. And I really hope people pick this up, The Last Decade of Cinema. One of my favorites that you wrote, although I shouldn't say that because every time I read one of your books, it becomes one of my new favorites. So,
Well, I'll try to make my next one not as good.
okay, or you can dedicate it to me too. I mean,
Oh, well, oh my
well,
goodness.
why not? Anyway, so I look forward to seeing you soon. I'm so grateful that you took the time to talk to me about this. And hello to Sarasota, and I'll be seeing you soon.
Yeah, I can't wait to have dinner.
Yeah. All right, everybody. So you can watch our show. Look at me. I'm thinking of videos and movies.
You
You
can
can
rent
watch
our
it.
video.
You can, yeah, right. You can find it on YouTube and Facebook. It just streams live, and also an audio version on iHeartRadio, Spotify. So wherever you get your podcast, just download Deborah Kobylt Live with Scott Ryan, and we'll pop right up for you. Very much looking forward to talking to Scott again the next time. Please pick up the book and DM me, everybody, and tell me what you think of it too. I'd appreciate it. Reach out to Scott as well. And so, what's your social media handles? It's weird.
Uh,
It's not like, go ahead.
it's at Scott Luck Story is Twitter. And on Instagram, it's the Blue Rose Mag is what from there. And they can go to tuckerdspress.com and I'll sign the book to them if they buy it there.
Oh, that's great. Okay, good. I'm glad that you mentioned all that because it is hard to find you on Instagram. Initially, I looked for Scott Ryan. I'm like, well, where is he? So I'm glad that you told us what your handle is for that. Thanks again, everybody, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.